Take a minute to think about your tombstone, or maybe what you would like to see in your obituary. Would you like to see more attention paid to your achievements or to your virtues? In the last two episodes, we have explored one paradigm of the happy life, that of pleasure. In this episode of Happiness and the Pursuit of the Good Life, we will move to a second paradigm, that of virtue. You're listening to Happiness and the Pursuit of the Good Life, a podcast about ancient wisdom, modern psychology, and the search for a life that is not only successful, but meaningful. I'm Michael Sadlow. Today, Aristotle and a life of virtue. Before diving in, let me return to the map I introduced earlier. In this podcast, I'm exploring four broad orientations toward the good life: pleasure, virtue, service, and acceptance or detachment. Pleasure asks, what feels good? Virtue asks, what kind of person am I becoming? Service asks, whom is my life for? And detachment asks, how should I live with suffering, loss, and change? Today, I want to discuss a life of virtue. Virtue circles us back to Aristotle. We met Aristotle earlier as a thinker of eudaimonia, the good life. Today, I want to return to him from a slightly different angle. Not happiness as the goal of life, but virtue as the formation of character. For Aristotle, the good life is one that perfects our unique capability to reason. Reason brings us inexorably to the conclusion that there are better and worse ways to live one's life. Reason teaches us that there are certain values that are good. These values are expression of the golden mean. Here's an example. We know that rashness is generally not a good characteristic. It can lead us, in extreme situations, to endanger our lives and the lives of those around us. In more mundane situations, it can lead to bad decisions, like investing a large portion of our savings in a stock that an internet meme promised is about to pop, or when annoyed, firing off a text message that we come quickly to regret. Yet, on the other hand, we recognize that extreme shyness and fear is also not the best way to live. It can lead us to not commit to a potential lover, or to isolate ourselves, to shun more prudent investing, and to turn down opportunities. So, what is between rashness and fear? Courage. True courage allows us to take calculated risks that minimize, but cannot completely eliminate, the possibility of loss and suffering. For a second example, let's return to our previous discussion of pleasure. Licentiousness is on one end of the spectrum. Living a life of unbridled sensual pleasure, even when not harming anyone else, probably doesn't appeal to most of us. Why? Because a part of us, Aristotle would say, the rational part, recognizes that this would not lead to a fulfilling life. But we are equally put off by abstinence, the deliberate refusal to enjoy sensual pleasure, and perhaps even self-mortification. The golden mean? Temperance, to use an old-fashioned word. This is what Ecclesiastes counseled as well, enjoying the pleasures that come to us, but in moderation. Aristotle gives us many such examples, which hew closely to those found in earlier Greek literature. Aristotle claims that because these ideal behaviors are deduced from reason, and reason is shared by humans of all places and times, they are universal rather than culturally specific. It has largely gone out of fashion in the humanities to talk of universal features or weave larger global theories. We're much more sensitive to cultural differences. Some of the behaviors and characteristics that we value, Aristotle didn't. Many people today, for example, value humility, whereas Aristotle thought that a person should neither over nor underestimate one's abilities and worth. The interesting point to consider, though, is that the golden mean approach can easily be understood to produce humility. It is often a matter of where to set the extremes and which values characterize the middle. To this point, I have vaguely been talking about values, behaviors, and characteristics, but we need to take one more step to virtue. Values are beliefs or principles that guide us. We value honesty, for example, for we seek to be honest with others. Virtues, though, are character traits. They are intrinsic to who we are. The famous story of George Washington cutting down a cherry tree and confessing that he did so to his father with the words, "I cannot tell a lie," is meant to convey that Washington had the virtue of honesty. So values and virtues are related, but they are not identical. I can put a high value on compassion, but not do such a good job of it in practice. When caring for others becomes almost reflexive and unthinking, then I have developed that virtue. A value is something you endorse. A virtue is something you practice until it has become part of you. In Aristotle's account, any human can gain knowledge of the virtues with the proper exercise of their rational faculty, as can the knowledge that flourishing comes to those who develop their virtues. However, developing the virtues, as Aristotle readily admits, is anything but universal and easy. We are not built from birth to be naturally virtuous. Virtue is a character trait that must be steadily and deliberately developed. Parents, of course, have a responsibility to help children develop their virtues. But so too does the state. Laws function to habituate us to virtue. Aristotle firmly believes that humans respond more readily to the threat of punishment than the promise of reward. And even then, since so few of us will habituate to perfect virtue, we always need a state with its laws and threat of force. Aristotle's somewhat pessimistic understanding of human nature largely tracks with modern psychological research. We respond better to threats of punishment than to promises of reward. Later religious thinkers inherited Aristotle's account of virtue, but they also found something missing. If virtue is simply the perfection of human reason, where is God? For thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas, Moses Maimonides, and Al-Ghazali, reason mattered enormously, but it could not be the final goal. Virtue had to be placed within a larger spiritual drama, the ordering of the soul toward God. Each had their own distinctive take on the issue. In future episodes, I hope, if you're interested, to deal more with the answers given by Aquinas and Maimonides. Here, though, let me turn to Al-Ghazali, who out of the three is the most skeptical of Aristotle's answer. Al-Ghazali was a Persian who lived in the 11th to 12th centuries and was one of the greatest Muslim theologians of the Middle Ages. In his tract, The Alchemy of Happiness, which is an extract of his magnum opus, Revival of the Religious Sciences, he lays out his theory of happiness. Like Aristotle, Al-Ghazali emphasizes the importance of our rational faculty. He grounds his understanding of the human being using the metaphor of the state. Imagine that the body is a kingdom. At its head is the soul, that is, its king. The king has two branches to enforce his will, the revenue collectors and the police. Both are necessary to get the body to do the will of the soul, but both are also prone to sometimes acting on their own. The revenue collectors, which he identifies as the passions, sometimes steal for their own account. The police officers, representing the faculty of anger and the spirit, can be unnecessarily severe or even brutal. Al-Ghazali is effectively describing a divided self at war with itself. This is where reason comes in. Reason is the prime minister in this metaphor, reconciling, cajoling, and threatening the passions and faculty of anger to obey the soul. Reason thus plays a crucial role in helping the individual realize his or her purpose. The difference with Aristotle here, though, is clear and sharp. Reason and its perfection is not the purpose. Its role is instrumental. On the one hand, reason helps us to control ourselves. It plays the function of the superego in Freud's formulation. On the other hand, it has the positive role of helping us to realize that nothing is higher than God. The goal for Al-Ghazali is closeness to, maybe even mystical union with God, which we get to by knowledge of God. Ultimately, knowledge of God can come only from God, but reason is necessary to prepare the way. Reason alone is not enough to prepare for knowledge of God. We also need virtue. He sees virtue as the correct ordering of the soul. It is the set of virtuous habits that help the soul order its passions. His metaphor for thinking about this is a medieval mirror, that is, a piece of shiny metal. The soul is a mirror that will ideally shine with the light of the divine reality. Sin and the exercise of the passions tarnish the mirror. A soul, as he puts it, thickly coated with the rust of sensual indulgence, can never achieve the ultimate pleasure of the knowledge of God. Exercise of virtuous behavior prevents rust and cleanses the mirror, so it's accessible to the divine light. Closeness to God is hard. Al-Ghazali recognizes this, and in fact states that basically it can only be achieved in the afterlife. Yet he also adds an interesting coda for those who doubt the existence of an afterlife. As he writes, even if he is doubtful about a future existence, reason suggests that he should act as if there were one, considering the tremendous issues at stake. His position here raises a number of complex issues about the relationship between belief, motivation, and action. Some beliefs, he argues, are beneficial for you because they motivate you to act in ways that you know are good for you, even if you are not entirely convinced that those beliefs are true. This might also be seen as an early formulation of Pascal's wager. If you believe in God, you go to heaven. If you don't, you'll be damned. Given the enormous consequences for getting this one wrong, what's the harm in believing in God? Especially, Al-Ghazali would add, if there really is motivational benefit to the belief, regardless of whether you think it's really true. Al-Ghazali never questions Aristotle's basic assumption that we are different than animals. We share with those animals a set of innate drives, our passions that ensure we seek both the food we need and mates to reproduce. We want to accumulate resources to protect ourselves and our progeny, and we are roused to anger when we feel threatened. Yet we, as human beings, also know that we cannot, should not, simply live according to what our passions desire. We know this, the philosophers and theologians would say, innately. Like other animals, we have some kind of sense that we must subordinate those passions in order to live in community. Unlike those animals, though, we somehow know that the unbridled exercise of our passions is bad for us as individuals. Reason is the faculty that both allows us to know that and is the key to controlling those passions in order to set us on a better course, one that will lead to self-fulfillment. When Plato discusses this relationship between the passions and reason, he uses the metaphor of the rider of wild horses. I prefer a slightly different metaphor offered by Buddhists and some Jewish sources, which equates controlling the passions to riding an elephant. In more modern terms, the elephant represents the entire complex of cognitive biases and emotional systems, many innate to humans but some socialized, that underlie the great bulk of what we do and how we live in the world. This complex is strong, and if we are not careful, it can easily crush us. If we are to move toward the good life, we must learn to nudge and to tame it. Reason is surely one of our primary tools. But Al-Ghazali also shows us where Aristotle falls short. Aristotle's idea that the purpose of life is to perfect our reason left Al-Ghazali cold, as it leaves me cold, and I assume many of you as well. Are we, presaging Descartes, simply rational minds? In an age where an AI pushes toward and perhaps soon against and beyond the capabilities of human reason, that's creepy. Reason, Al-Ghazali declares, is uniquely human and incredibly important, but we must use it as a means to an end, not the end in itself. Reason might be part of the soul, but for Al-Ghazali, so too is the heart, the qalb. It is the heart's quest to transcend into divine union that is primary. Transcendence, not perfection of reason, is our real goal. For Aristotle, virtue is a manifestation of reason. Being perfectly virtuous is an outward manifestation of someone who has perfected reason. Al-Ghazali sees virtue as cultivated habits that lead toward that purification of the heart, allowing for a deeper connection with the divine. As with reason, a life of virtue is necessary but insufficient. So when all is said and done, will striving to live a virtuous life make you happy? It may. It creates a framework for responding to your elephant in a way that can feel elevating. We can take more control over our passions than any other living creature. People tend to admire others who are virtuous more than they do those who are not. But maybe that's shifting in our influencer-obsessed culture. Virtue helps us to live in communities, and it helps communities develop compelling narratives for their existence. I would rather join a community that promotes a value that I share than one that elevates materialism. Aside from these potential psychological and social benefits, the argument for virtue becomes far stronger when understood as a path for God, or at least the transcendent. Many of us yearn to be part of something bigger. Can that be the pole around which we orient our lives? If your obituary listed only your achievements, something important might still be missing. Virtue names that missing thing, not what you accomplished, but who you became in the course of accomplishing. For Aristotle, Al-Ghazali, and scores of other Western thinkers in this tradition, virtue is objective. We naturally recognize when someone is virtuous. That shared recognition flows from our shared reason. For Aristotle, that recognition is pretty much everything. The state of eudaimonia is always a state of becoming until the very end. Only then can it be judged to have been successful or not. For Al-Ghazali, the virtue is objective and its achievement is visible to outsiders. But even the most virtuous person might not be in a position to get close to God. To get that, a virtuous person must also engage in spiritual practices. Ultimately, though, it is God who decides to whom to grow near. We must live with uncertainty, but optimism. Living a virtuous life, then, is far more complicated than simply being a good person. It requires a fundamental orientation around cultivating habits that tame the worst parts of human desire. It means becoming someone else, a better person, according to both Aristotle and Al-Ghazali. What was self-evident to Aristotle and Al-Ghazali might not be self-evident to us. Most of us probably believe that it's good to be virtuous. We hope our children become honest, courageous, generous, patient, and kind. But why? Why should virtue matter if it does not always bring pleasure, success, status, or even happiness? So here is the question to sit with this week. What virtue would you most like to be remembered for? And what would it take to practice that virtue until it became not just something you admire, but part of who you are. You're listening to Happiness and the Pursuit of the Good Life with me, Michael Satlow. Readings, resources, and ways to support the podcast are available in the show notes and at mlsatlow.com. I welcome your questions and feedback.